It's so fun to be with you. It's the Christmas season. We're all together. I want to get you ready for the Christmas season. As I just thought and prayed about what to share with you for the next few weeks, I thought, I want you to be happy when you get together with family. And here's kind of my thing. Happy home, happy holidays, right? Happy home, happy holidays. But how many of you know this, that not every family is a happy family? How many of you guys, sometimes there's drama in the family. Maybe when you get together with family, like you love family. You love getting together with family for up to 2 hours. How many are like that, okay? After that, it just gets really old. Some things go on. Here's what I know about people. All people are great until you get to know them, right? And you know if you really like somebody or not. If you spend 4 hours in a car with them on a road trip, you can tell after 4 hours whether you want to go another 4 hours with that whole thing, see? But since you were together at the last holiday get-together, maybe it was at Thanksgiving, and now you got Christmas coming up, and you're already thinking in your mind about who's going to be there and who's not going to be there. Maybe things are just kind of awkward because since the last holiday season, there's been a divorce. You're not at home. You've got a step-parent. There's been a big fight, maybe at the last gathering. There's been some things that have gone on in marriages or in families, things that have been said. And let's just be honest, getting together, it's just weird. And moms and dads, husbands, wives, you know about this because when you're driving to the house or before they're coming to your house, you psychoanalyze your family, don't you? Well, you know the problem they're like that because this happened when they're kid, and it's kind of a generational thing. Grandparents, and well, you know, Bubba was dropped on his head as a baby, and that's why he, and this whole, you got an explanation, and then you already got an exit strategy in mind because when things go bad, okay, we're going to leave by this time, or, you know, we're not going to go until this time because Edna's going to be there until 1, and I don't want to be there when Aunt Edna's there, and so we're going to wait for her to go home, and then we can show up later. Anybody relate to any of this? This is not my family, by the way. This is your family I'm talking about, okay? And here's what I want you to understand about this whole thing, that I want you to have a happy home. And things that make homes unhappy during the holidays is when there's just all of this junk, this drama. It's mama drama. It's just sibling drama. It's all kinds of things that are going on inside the home. You just want to be together with that whole thing. What I want you to understand is that the issue, whatever you think the issue is, isn't their issue. It's your issue. And here's why it's your issue. Because if there is some kind of feelings of dread and unforgiveness getting together with people, you know what? You don't have any control over how they act or what they say, but you have total control over how you act and what you say. And so the issue isn't their issue, it's your issue. Whenever you're offended, and we've all been offended, right? And there's little offenses, like when you're driving through Mart, okay? You're going to go to Mart, do Christmas shopping, and you've got laser vision. There is my parking spot. Somebody exited, it's the one that's closest to the door. I prayed that prayer, hallelujah, right? And so in order to get there, you have to make one more loop around the parking lot. And lo and behold, before you get there, somebody, and so you're cocking the gun, right? You're ready to go because they took your parking spot. I prayed for that spot. Now you can get over that kind of thing, but there's other things that have happened in family. There's been divorce, there's been abuse, there's been betrayal, there's been words that have been said, there's words that were never said that we wish were said, and there's just something that's going on there. And we don't know if we want to be together or not. And I want you to know that there's some key elements that we over the next few weeks are going to speak into your lives that we think if you have these elements in place in your family, it's going to make a happy home and thus a happy holiday. Now, one of the things that can make homes an unhappy place is when there's unforgiveness or a grudge or whatever it is that you want to call it. And we're going to look at a story today that really addresses this whole thing. It's a real story. It's a true story. And here's where we're going to go today. We're going to read a whole bunch of verses. I'm going to tell you a story. You might be familiar with the story. And then at the end of the story, we're going to make the application. If you want to follow along, we're going to start in Genesis chapter 37. Genesis chapter 37. Let me give you a little backdrop to this whole thing. We're going to talk about 12 brothers that became the names for the 12 tribes of Israel. In fact, their dad's name is Jacob. Dad is Jacob. And Jacob, his name is later changed by God himself to the name Israel. Israel, a.k.a. Jacob, has 12 sons. They become the 12 tribes of Israel. And one of those is Judah, from which we get Jesus. You can read about the lineage of Jesus in Matthew chapter 1. Judah is in that whole lineage, and he was one of the brothers here. But of all of them, there's one guy, his name is Joseph. And this is what I love about Joseph. Joseph, well, we're going to see a little bit about Joseph. Let me just read it to you in Genesis 37, beginning in verse number 2. Jacob, mind you, has 4 wives. So Joseph has a bunch of half-brothers. Maybe you have half-brothers or sisters. I had a stepbrother and 3 stepsisters. And this is what I know. This is what I know about those kind of families. Blended families don't blend, do they? They collide, right? Anybody collide in your family, that whole kind of thing? I hated my stepbrother. That's a whole other sermon. We got over it, and I'll bring that around at the end of this story. I'm not that bad. Just hear me out, all right? So here's the backdrop. Here's the story for Joseph, beginning in verse number 2 of chapter 37. This is the account of Jacob and his family when Joseph was 17 years old. Now that's key. He's 17. I want you to follow along in the age of Joseph. He's only 17 years old. He often tended his father's flock, so he's a good boy. He's working for dad. He worked for his half-brothers, the sons of his father's wives, Bilhah and Zilpah. And then this is what I love about Joseph. Look at this. But he reported to his father some of the bad things his brothers were doing. How many in here had a tattletale in the family? Raise your hand, right? How many, you were the tattletale in your family, and you have the scars to prove it, right? Okay. So one of the things we know about Joseph is he's 17 years old and he's a tattletale. Next thing, verse number 3, Jacob loved Joseph. He loved Joseph more than any of his other children because Joseph had been born to him in his old age. And so one day, Jacob had a special gift made for Joseph. He took him down to Men's Warehouse and he bought him some clothes. None of the other brothers got it, but he got this beautiful robe. And so this is a perfect setup for great sibling rivalry, right? Dad loves him more than the rest. He gets showered with different kind of gifts than everybody else. Plus, he's a tattletale. Verse number 4, but his brothers hated Joseph because their father loved him more than the rest of them. They couldn't say a kind word to him. So it kind of sets up the tension in the story, doesn't it? Well, as the story plays out, maybe you've read this, Joseph has some dreams. Joseph has a dream. One of the dreams, he dreams and he tells his family, I had this dream last night. It was amazing. We were out cutting wheat, and of course they didn't use like a combine back in those days. They're just cutting wheat. And guess what? And then to bundle the wheat, they just tie it together. And guess what happened? Your bundles of wheat bowed down to my bundle of wheat. Isn't that cool? They didn't think it was cool. He had another dream a couple nights later. I had this other dream. Mom, Dad, listen to my dream. There was 12 stars, and all the stars bowed down to me, and not only the stars, but the sun and the moon as well. Isn't that cool? Mom and Dad didn't think it was cool either. Time goes on. One day, Dad sends out the brothers to go tend the flock out at this place called Shechem. And he tells Joseph, who's hanging out at home, you need to take some snacks down to them, get some Swiss cake rolls and some sandwiches, and just head out and see how the brothers are doing. So on his way to where we read in verse number 18, when Joseph's brothers saw him coming, they recognized him in the distance, and as he approached, they made plans to kill him. Sound like your family? Right? No, I never killed my brother or sister, but in my mind, whatever the case is. So look what they say, verse 19. Here comes the dreamer, they said. Come, let's kill him and let's throw him into one of these cisterns, these holes dug in the ground just to hold water. And then we can tell our father that a wild animal has eaten him, and then we'll see what becomes of this dreamer. That's a great plan. So that's exactly what they do. Now Simeon planned to come back later and extract him out of the well, that whole kind of thing, but that was never followed through. And they sit down and have some lunch. While they're eating their lunch, this caravan of traders, they were Ishmaelites. They come through there on their camels and that whole kind of thing through the desert, and they're wandering through. And Judah says, you know what? Let's not kill the boy. That would just crush Dad's heart. Let's sell him let's sell him to these guys. And so they do. We can make some money. So for like 20 pieces of silver, 17 pieces of silver, whatever it was, they sell him. So now Joseph, betrayed by his brothers, they plotted to kill him. Well, didn't kill him, but they sold him. Now he's with his caravan, and off to Egypt they go. When they get to Egypt, the caravan of traders decides, well, we could make some money on the boy. So they sell him to this guy named Potiphar. Potiphar is one of the ranking officials to Pharaoh. Pharaoh is the most powerful leader in the world at the time, over the most powerful nation at the time. And so now Joseph, 17 years old, is extracted from his family. And back home, Jacob, Dad, is shedding tears, thinking that his son is dead, because that's what the brothers did. They brought his beautiful robe back. They'd put animal blood on it and says, do you recognize the robe? Hello, they all recognize the robe. And Jacob deduces that his son is dead. But in fact, he's in slavery in Potiphar's house. Well, Potiphar puts him in charge. You should read this stuff. If you've never read this, this is an amazing story. If this would be a PG-13 movie, I'm just telling you. Because look how the story goes out. Genesis chapter 39, verse 6. So Potiphar gave Joseph complete administrative responsibilities over everything he owned. With Joseph, he didn't worry about a thing except of what kind of food he was going to eat. Don't you wish that's all you had to worry about in life? Honey, Pizza Hut or Culver's? I don't know. I mean, I'm just stressing over the decision for a meal. That's all that he worried about because he trusted Joseph so much. Well, the story plays out, and this is where it gets so juicy. It says in verse 7 that Joseph was very handsome and well-built young man. That's what I looked like when I was 17. Just saying. And Potiphar's wife, we don't know what she looked like. She began to look at him lustfully. And here's what she says, "Come and sleep with me," she demanded. Now, here's what I know. You don't need somebody else in bed with you to sleep, right? I've slept alone. You slept alone, right? I don't think she's talking about sleeping here, right? She has something else in mind. Well, daily, Joseph resists her advances. And then finally, one day, it's just Joseph and Mrs. Potiphar in the house. And she grabs a hold of him, pins him against the wall, gets nose to nose, eye to eye, almost lip to lip, and says the very same thing to him. And Joseph, out of his respect to his employer, Potiphar, and out of his reverence to God, says, "How could I do such a sinful thing and sin against your husband and against God?" Slips out of her hands, and when he does it, he just drops down, runs out of the house, and she's left there holding his outer garment. Well, she's no fool. She's going to tell the story. She's going to tell the story in such a way that she is the victim. So she tells the story, and she says to her husband in verse 16, she kept the cloak until her husband comes home. Verse 17, and then she told him her story. "That Hebrew slave that you brought into our house, he tried to come and fool around with me," she said. "But when I screamed, he ran outside, leaving the cloak in my hand, just leaving it with me." Here's the incredible thing. Whenever you've been offended and something has gone on in your life, you know how you tell the story? You're always the victim, aren't you? It was never your fault. Every time you tell the story when you've been offended and somebody has hurt you, you always tell the story so it slants towards and people will listen to your story and go, "Oh, pity, oh, pity you. That's terrible. That should never have happened." That's exactly what she's doing in the story. Well, Potiphar reacts like any good man would respond. In verse number 19, he was furious when he heard his wife's story about how Joseph had treated her. So he took Joseph and he threw him into the prison where the king's prisoners were held. And there he remained. End of story. Not quite. When you do the math and you read the story, Joseph is in this prison for about 10 years until we get to the next part of our story. In fact, he spends 12 years there. And for 10 years, he's talking to his cellies about why he's there and how unjust it is that he's there. "It wasn't my fault. My brothers betrayed me." And then Potiphar's wife, "Well, she was nothing to look at, but here I am anyway." And that whole kind of story. And he's telling the story. Whoever will listen to the story, he tells the story. And this prison's nothing like you would experience today. There was no rec time, probably, no TVs, and not 3 hots and a cot. I imagine it to be a very miserable place. Eventually, over time, after he'd been there about 10 years, now he's 27 years old roughly, a couple of guys get admitted into the prison who worked for the Pharaoh. One was a cupbearer and the other one was a baker. Guess what the baker did? He baked stuff, okay? And the cupbearer, he bared the cup. That's what he did. All right. They both get thrown into prison, and now they're cellies with Joseph. And over time, they have some dreams. Well, Joseph's had dreams before, and he's got a relationship with God. And you know what? God reveals him the contents of the dream. He says to the baker, "I've got some bad news for you. Here's what your dream means. You're going to die." He says to the cupbearer, though, "I got great news for you. You're going to get your job back. And you're going to stand next to Pharaoh and you're going to hold his cup again. Hey, and do me a favor. When you get back there, will you tell him that I'm here unjustly and I have no business being in this prison?" "Sure, I'll tell him. Yeah, not a problem." But guess what happens? He gets his job back and he just kind of forgets all about Joseph. Well, one day, Pharaoh, the most powerful man in the world, he has a dream. In fact, he has 2 dreams. he doesn't know the meaning of these dreams. He can't figure them out. I'm not going to tell you the dreams. You can read the story. But he has these dreams, and he's just perplexed over the meaning. He doesn't know what they mean. The cupbearer, in the course of conversation, here's Pharaoh talking about the dreams. All of a sudden, it's the light bulb moment. I remember this cellie I had back in prison. His name was Joseph. I had a dream, Baker had a dream, and he told him, and yeah, it happened just that way. Well, Pharaoh says, well, go get the guy. Don't stand around here. So they get Joseph out of prison. Get him all shaved, cleaned up, new set of clothes again. They bring him into Pharaoh's court, and Pharaoh says, what's the meaning of this dream? Can you interpret this? And Joseph says, I can't, but God can. So he tells him the dream, and Joseph says, well, here's what's going to happen. Here's the meaning of your dreams. For the next 7 years, there's going to be prosperity in your land. You're going to have bumper crops. It's just going to be incredible how much food you have. But then after that, there's going to be 7 more years that are lean years where there's going to be great starvation over all the land. So here's my suggestion. I would prepare for the lean years by holding back some of the crop in the good years and banking it, putting it in storage bins so that there's food to feed people. Pharaoh thought, this is brilliant. Who are we going to have to do this? I think I know. And all of a sudden, Joseph has been resurrected from prison, elevated to the second in command in the most powerful nation in the world. In fact, Pharaoh says this in chapter 41, verse 44. Pharaoh said to him, I am Pharaoh. I just want to remind you who's in charge, but no one will lift a hand or foot in the entire land of Egypt without your approval. So there's 7 great years goes on. It's just amazing. 7 great years. Butler Grain Bins is building grain bins as fast as they can sell them, and they're filling them with grain, and it's all just a great time in the land of Egypt. And then on the 8th year, I don't know, rain or what happened? But food becomes pretty scarce. The famine wasn't only in Egypt. It was all the way back in the land of Canaan, where Joseph came from, where his 11 brothers and dad still lived. One day, Jacob and the other boys are sitting around and they're twiddling their thumbs. There's no crop to bring in because there's drought going on, and all they can hear is the rumble of one another's stomachs. And so they decide, we need to do something about this. And somebody said, I hear there's food down in Egypt. We got to go down to, we can buy food in Egypt. So Jacob says, well, don't just sit around here. Saddle up the donkeys. Let's go. And take some money with you so you can go buy some grain. So off to Egypt they go. Now, in order to get the grain, in order to get the food that they need to eat and bring back to Canaan, guess who they have to go to buy it? Joseph, or whatever you want to call him, all right? And they get there, and in chapter 42, it says, although Joseph recognized his brothers when they came to buy the food, they didn't recognize him. It's 13 years later. He's 30 years old. You know how you try to grow a beard when you're 17, but you just can't. I bet you now he did. He's looking different. Nobody recognized him. Different clothes, different appearance, but he knew his brothers. The story goes on in verse 9. And then he remembered the dreams that he had about them many years earlier. I think I had a dream that one day they were going to bow down to me. He said, you know what? He says to his brothers, now there's no reveal yet. They don't know who Joseph is. He says to them, you know what? You're spies, and you've come to see how vulnerable our land is. Verse 10 is great. No, my lord, they exclaimed. Your servants have simply come to buy food. We're all brothers, members of the same family. We're honest men, sir. Yeah, right. Okay. We're honest men, and we're not spies. What you understand as you read the story, they had a guilty conscience. Verse 13. Sir, they said, there's actually, if I just now because of their guilty conscience, let's just be honest. There's actually, there's 12 of us, we your servants, are all brothers, sons of a man living back in the land of Canaan. And our youngest brother, his name was Benjamin, he's back there with our father right now. And one of our brothers is no longer with us. Well, that was true, sort of, except for he was standing right in front of them. They just didn't recognize him. So Joseph kind of has a plan. He plays on their guilty conscience a little bit. He takes his brothers. He takes the 10 brothers that was there, because there's Joseph who's there, then the 10 who bought food, and then Benjamin, the youngest, is back in Canaan. So he puts them in prison for 3 days, probably the same prison that he had been in for 12 years. After 3 days, he releases them again out of the prison, and he says, all right, here's what I want you to do. I want you to do, you need to bring back your little brother. Oh, we can't do that. We can't. My dad said no, because we've already lost one brother, that whole kind of drama going on. He says, you need to go back, and until you bring him back, one of you is going to stay behind in this prison. And it turned out to be Simeon. Simeon, if I was Simeon, I'd be like, guys, hurry, all right? Hurry. So, just hurry. Now, what they don't know is that Joseph takes the money that they brought to buy food, and he ties it at the top of their sacks of grain. So now they're heading back home. They're out in the middle of nowhere. They get out some grain to feed the donkeys, feed themselves, and there is their money at the top of their sacks. A little bit of panic sets in. What does this mean? And oh boy, they're just scared, and the guilty conscience is still there. And they finally get back home, and I don't know that while they're enjoying all this food back home, I'm thinking poor Simeon's in prison. I don't know how long it took him to run out of food. And Judah's saying, look, we've got to go back and buy more food, otherwise we're all going to die. But we can't go back if we don't bring Benjamin back. Jacob says, I've already lost one boy. I'm not going to lose another. I'm not going to let this happen. Judah says in chapter 43, verse number 8, he says to his father, send the boy with me, and I'll give my... and he says, and we'll be on our way. Otherwise, we're all going to die of starvation, and not only you and me, but our little ones as well. Verse 9, he says, I personally guarantee his safety. You may hold me responsible if I don't bring him back to you. Then let me bear the blame forever. Well, this time they go back. They go back with little brother Benjamin. Got to go buy some more food. They get to Egypt. Who do they have to see again? But big brother, or not big brother, but their brother Joe. Joseph now sees Benjamin for the first time in 12 plus years. Can you imagine all of those years? Potiphar's house, prison, now in Pharaoh's court. All those holidays without your family around. All of those holidays thinking about what happened to get you where you are now. All of those holidays where Jacob sits there and he's got 11 sons sitting around the table in one empty chair, in the anguish and the pain of losing that child, not knowing what happened to them. Well, now the brothers come back, and this time they bring Benjamin, and for the first time, Joseph sees Benjamin. The story goes on to say in verse number 30 that when Joseph saw him, it said he had to hurry from the room because he was overcome with emotion for his brother. He went into his private room where he broke down and he wept. Verse 31 says, after washing his face, he came back, keeping himself under control, and then he ordered, bring out the food. So he's going to have a meal now with his brothers. No, there's no big reveal yet. They still don't know who Joseph is. Joseph knows who they are. And then Joseph kind of plays on the guilty conscience again a little bit. He sends them all back home. He sends them all back home with food in their grain sacks, ties the money once again. He puts a blessing upon the people who hurt him. Blessing, that's key about forgiveness, blessing the people who've hurt you. And then he's got his silver cup. This is Joseph's silver cup. This is his favorite cup. You all got a favorite cup at home, don't you? Because don't you hate it? The family comes together and they start going rifling through the cupboards looking for the coffee cup, and they got your cup, right? Okay, so he puts his cup intentionally in the top of Benjamin's sack. They all saddle up on their donkeys and they're headed out of town. And then after they get out of town, they're just a short ways out. Joseph says to his attendant, he says, go after them, search through their things and find my silver cup. Which he does. He starts with the oldest, starts going down, finally gets to Benjamin's bag, pulls out the silver cup. To which now the brothers with an already guilty conscience are going, we're dead. We're dead. And Judah's panicking because he swore his life in place of Benjamin's. If anything should happen to Benjamin, like we are so dead. So they all saddle up their donkeys. They head back into Egypt. They've got to go see Joseph again. And the story picks up in chapter 45. Joseph, when he sees his brothers again all together, they've come together now for a meal in his court because he says, I want you to come and have a meal with me. It says Joseph could stand it no longer. There were many people in the room, and he said to his attendants, out, all of you. And so he was alone with his brothers when he told them who he was. And then he broke down and wept. He didn't shake his fist in anger. He didn't recount to them what they had done wrong. You're idiots, you're lunkheads, you're stupid. He didn't do any of that. He's overcome with emotion. Verse 3, look what he says to his brothers. I'm Joseph, he says to his brothers. Is my father still alive? Can you imagine the look on their faces at this point? I'm Joseph. Hey guys, I'm Joseph. And in that moment, a million thoughts go through your mind. We thought maybe Joseph was dead. Now he's the one controlling our destiny. We are dead. He wants to know if Dad's still alive. And they were stunned to realize that Joseph was standing there in front of them. I bet they were. He says, please, in verse 4, please come closer, he said to them. So they came closer, and he said again, I'm Joseph, your brother, whom you sold into slavery into Egypt, like they hadn't forgot. But then the key to the story is found in the next verse. I like what Joseph says to them next in verse 5. But don't be upset and don't be angry with yourselves for selling me in this place. He says, it was God who sent me here ahead of you to preserve your life. You know what? You know, you can tell when you've forgiven somebody when you tell them to forgive themselves. When you can tell them to take themselves off the hook, you know you've forgiven them. The incredible thing is the person that you think might be your enemy and the person that you hate and have distaste for might later on in God's economy, his sense of humor and his sense of timing might be the very person that you need in a moment of your crisis. So wouldn't it be good to keep relations sweet between you and that person? Do you know you've forgiven somebody when you've told them that they can forgive themselves after they had this big meal together and they kind of get composure? I mean, Joseph says, you need to come back here, but bring Dad and all the little ones, bring them all back. And then he says to them, and on your way home, don't fight about this amongst yourselves. Because you know how it is in the families. Oh, you know, if you hadn't said, or if you didn't do this, or if you hadn't done, none of this would have happened. We try to find a reason for it, and we just fight about it. And Joseph says, don't even go there. It's all done. It's all done. And you know, here's what I want you to understand about the story. I don't think Joseph got over his feelings of betrayal and anger towards his brothers in a day. I think it took 12 years in prison. In fact, I think he was stewing about it up until that time when the cupbearer and the baker were in prison. And he says, hey, when you get back to Pharaoh's table back there, remember me? I think between that 10-year period and the 12-year period, I think somewhere along the line, Joseph came to realize, you know what? I can't change my circumstances. I can't change what my brothers did to me. All I can change is how I feel about them. And it doesn't matter anymore. It just doesn't matter anymore. Because you know what? You can't change what somebody else does to you, but you can change how you respond to what they do to you. Because the issue isn't their issue. It's really your issue. It's my issue. If you want to have a happy holiday, you've got to have a happy home. Have a happy home, you have to remove the stuff out of the house that makes it unhappy. And one of those things is unforgiveness or a grudge or whatever the feeling is. And it's a process. Now look, like I said earlier, if somebody steals your parking spot, you can get over that. But when somebody divorces you, when they have an affair, when they betray you, when they say hurtful words, when they sexually or physically abuse you, you don't get over that in a day. I haven't told this story. In fact, there's people who have been a part of this church for a long, long time that knew me when I was here as a youth pastor. They've never heard this story, but I'm going to tell you the story about my own journey, my own quest to find forgiveness for somebody. I came to faith in this church, and I worked as a youth pastor in this church for a time, went off to Bible college. A pastor hired me to come back here and be the youth pastor, and it was great. It was just a great time, and the youth group was growing and prospering. Everything was going great. And then the pastor left, and I stayed on as the interim pastor, and then this new pastor came into the church, and he says, I'll keep you as a youth pastor. Just stay, I'll keep you as a youth pastor. Let me just tell you that working with that pastor was a year in non-heaven. I'm just telling you, it just did not go well. It was not a great year. Probably not for him, I don't know, but for sure not for me. There was many Sundays we would come home from church and there was tears in Robin's eyes, and I was questioning things in relationship with him all the time. And then I just thought, I loved this church. I loved my youth group. I loved this church. I loved the people of the church. I loved Williston. I'm from Williston, and I loved the security of Williston. I love being here. And if I wasn't here, I didn't know what else I would do. And then one day, this pastor with whom I worked, that things didn't go so well. There was nothing he did wrong, nothing I did wrong. It was just we just didn't get along. And he calls me in the office one day, and we chit-chatted a little bit, and in retrospect, I see how difficult this conversation must have been for him, because finally he just works it into the conversation, and he says, I think it's time for you to find a different church. Well, two thoughts came to my mind in just an instant. Number one, I'm freaked out right now because where am I going to go and what am I going to do? Number two, praise God, I don't have to work with this man anymore. We left. There was just a lot of things I just didn't like the way we were left and asked to leave. We felt shame when we left. Felt humiliated when we left. And we went off to Glen Ullin, North Dakota and pastored a church. And I'm just stewing that I got kicked out of the nest. I mean, I was just mad about that whole thing, stewing. I'm in Glen Ullin, my new church. I'm there only a matter of a few weeks. And I take some of the students from our church up to Devil's Lake, North Dakota, to Lakewood Park Bible Camp, to youth camp. And I'm having a great time. I've kind of wiped the dust off my feet from what happened in this church. And here we are in the campgrounds, and it's kind of a quiet evening. I think the service has already started. I'm outside for whatever reason, maybe checking cabins, coming back down. And here comes this beat-up old Dodge van into the parking lot. I knew the van right away. It's like, what is he doing here? And it was a pastor from this church. I pulled out a gun and shot out his tires right there. I just camp was great. I'm just getting on with I was dreading it. Do you know what it's like when that person walks into your family gathering? What are they doing here? You've thought that, haven't you? We had a conversation together. Fortunately, that week I could talk to him a little differently than I could at any other time. And he had his own struggles. But I didn't care about his struggles. All I cared about was the hurt I felt. We kind of talked things out. Went back to my church and pastored. And every time I told the story about leaving Williston, guess who was the martyr in the story? I was. I could tell the story in such a way I could get you to pull out tissues and feel bad for me. Poor me. It wasn't until I heard a message very much like this that I realized the issue wasn't his issue. It was my issue. And I better do something about this. You know when you've forgiven somebody, when you can tell the story and you're not the victim anymore. And I got to that place. Did it happen overnight? No. Am I there now? Yes. Ironically, it's fun? I got fired from this church. Now I'm pastoring this church. Isn't that funny the way God works about things? And then after I came here 5.5 years ago, a card comes in the mail at the church mailbox here from the pastor that fired me, congratulating me on being elected as a pastor to pastor the church. And I could honestly read the card and read his remarks and not have any ill feelings. I could speak well of him. I can pray blessings over him now. I couldn't do it right away. So here's what I heard from a guy named Rick Allen. Here's his thing. He said, look, it's okay for everybody else to be a jerk, just not you. And that's the moral of the story. So if you've been hurt, and if you've been offended, that happens, because guess what? We live with people, and you're going to get offended. In fact, you might get offended at this church. Life Church is an equal opportunity offender, okay? We might offend you. I might offend you. And you know what? When you're offended, here's the gist. We're going to close in prayer in just a moment. When you're offended, you know what you got to do? Get over it. Get over it. I'm sorry, some of the wounds, and I don't want to be insensitive, some of the wounds are deep. And so when I say get over it, I'm not saying, today just get over it. I'm saying get over it. And sometimes it's a process. I think it took Joseph a long time to get over it. But when he got over it, God, I think Joseph was released from prison even while he was still in prison when he got over it. And you'll be the same way as well.